Did you hear they replaced the snack fridge with a wellness hub that only stocks celery water and kombucha? Richard muttered, his voice bouncing off the sterile glass walls of his office like a whisper in a mausoleum. No one answered, not because they didn't hear, but because no one talked anymore. At least, not without scheduling it 2 days in advance, via Outlook, and calling it a collaboration sync. 15 years, that's how long he'd been the spine of Horizon Dynamics. Not some cog in the machine, but bone and tendon, part of the actual skeleton that kept the company upright when its knees buckled during the 299 crash, when its CEO had a nervous breakdown in 2013, and during that god-awful rebrand in 2006 that turned their logo into a blue gradient turd. He'd been here before there was an HR department, before the espresso machine for key fobs. He had helped code their first client dashboard while sitting on a yoga ball in a garage that reeker of burnt pizza and ambition. Now he was sitting in what looked like a cross between a spa and a minimum security prison, one of Apex Global focus pods, equipped with sound-dampening walls and emotion-dampening lighting. The carpet was so soft it felt hostile, like it was hiding something. The merger had officially closed last Tuesday. Apex Global had absorbed Innovate Solutions like a python swallowing a hamster, slow, suffocating, inevitable. There had been cupcakes, of course, dry, overly frosted ones that tasted like wet printer paper and forced celebration. There had been speeches, too, executives from Apex Global talking about unlocking mutual potential, harmonizing verticals and onboarding synergy as if they were programming a spaceship, not dismantling the human fabric of a company. Richard had clapped politely with everyone else, but the pit in his stomach had formed right there between unlocking and synergy. He knew a hit job when he heard one. This wasn't a merger. It was a gutting, a purge with a smile. That morning, a fresh-faced baby in all birds and arrogance had knocked on his glass. He had the kind of face that looked like it had never known a poor decision or a bad haircut. "Hey, Richard, right?" he asked, stepping in without waiting for a yes. "I'm the senior project manager for infrastructure and platform migration," he said, enunciating each word like a scalpel. His tone said, "Don't waste my time, Junior." "Oh, wow. Okay, awesome. So, do you actually still use Jenkins? We're thinking about consolidating into Azure for, continuity." He blinked once slowly. "Do I still use Jenkins?" he repeated, like a priest forced to say the name of a demon, nodded with the smug enthusiasm of someone who'd once Googled how to talk to technical people. "Yeah, we're just evaluating resource redundancies and trying to eliminate friction." "Friction?" He echoed, his voice flat. "Got it." The kid, his badge said, Toby Apex Global Integration Team, like he was the brand ambassador for colonoscopy, gave his finger guns and strolled out, muttering something into his Apple Watch. He turned back to his dual monitors where 2 weeks ago he'd been overseeing a multi-million-dollar cross-platform deployment. Today he was reviewing a PDF titled Apex Global Integration Policy Final PDF. It read like a dystopian constitution, pages of legal clauses that boiled down to yours now. Everything you were, everything you built, irrelevant. One paragraph stood out. All employment agreements previously governed by Horizon Dynamics shall be considered null and void upon completion of merger and replaced by Apex Global Standard at will employment policies effective immediately. Richard exhaled slowly. There it is, the opening shot, not with a meeting or a conversation or even a warning, just a PDF with dead language and fine print, quietly erasing everything he had helped build. His phone buzzed. Calendar invite from Change Management. 50 minutes. No agenda listed. That wasn't ominous at all. He leaned back in his chair, which still bore the imprint of 11 years of late nights and back pain, and let his eyes drift across the office. The Horizon Dynamics team, the old guard, the people who used to share beers after product launches and memes during deployment weekends, now sat stiff and quiet, their screens glowing like pale tombstones. Newer folks, the ones from Apex Global, moved like they already owned the place. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't need any instructions. His gaze drifted to the bottom drawer of his desk. He reached down and pulled it open. There, nestled between a tangle of USB-C chargers and a stress ball shaped like a server rack, was the leather-bound folio Walter had given his 13 years ago. It was embossed in gold, old-school elegance in a sea of cloud-based nothingness. He hadn't looked at it in years, but now something pulled at him. Back then, Walter had handed it over with that dopey grin of his face. "You're one of the originals," he'd said like he was knighting him. I added a clause in there. Might sound weird, but if anything ever happens, like we get acquired or something stupid, this clause makes sure they can't screw you. It's not standard, but you're not standard. He had laughed, shoved it in a drawer, and never thought about it again until now, till he read that one line in the PDF, null and void. A calendar reminder pinged 10 minutes. Richard stared at the folio, then at the email, then at the door, where a laminated poster with the phrase "One Omni, One Future" had been slapped over the old Innovate mission statement. His stomach churned. Not with fear, not quite, something older, something darker, a knowing. He wasn't paranoid. He was next, and they were stupid enough not to know what he was holding. Past had come calling, and it had teeth. They held the town hall in what used to be the developer bullpen, once a chaotic living organism of whiteboards, energy drinks, and shouted ideas. Now it had been sterilized into an event space, complete with foldable chairs arranged with creepy precision, a branded step and repeat in the back corner, and a table of boxed water-labeled hydration station. Someone had laid out Apex Global stress cubes that looked like they were designed to crumble in your hand the moment you squeezed them, which, if intentional, was disturbingly on brand. Richard sat in the third row, hands folded in his lap like he was back in Sunday school, but the sermon here came with less soul and more PowerPoint. The Apex Global CEO strutted onto the makeshift stage like a cruise ship host, flanked by two younger executives who looked as if they'd been genetically engineered to wear lanyards. His name was Elias something. He couldn't remember, but it hardly mattered. He was the type who used your first name 5 times in the first minute and smiled like he was selling you a reverse mortgage. "Let's talk about transformation." He began clapping as if he expected applause. "We are so thrilled to welcome the Innovate family into the Apex Global ecosystem. We're not just joining a company. You are joining a movement." Richard stared at him stone-faced. The only movement he could feel was the slow roll of nausea creeping up his throat. He launched into a sermon of buzzwords: culture sync, process harmonization, cost-neutral restructuring, and his favorite, it seemed, synergistic redundancies. Every few sentences he'd pause and nod solemnly, like a preacher waiting for someone to shout, "Amen." No one did. Not a sound came from the Innovate team, not even a cough. They sat frozen, their bodies present but their minds elsewhere. Somewhere back when their work meant something. When their product roadmap hadn't been hijacked by suits who thought agile meant sending emails faster. He glanced to the side of Walter. His Walter, the founder who had once pitched their product with so much fire that investors signed checks just to shut him up. He was standing off to the right, shoulders hunched in a suit that didn't fit quite right, eyes glazed. A man who had once danced on tables after launch nights now looked like he'd been left in the rain. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't even introduced. He was there but not present. Next to him stood a man from Apex Global Legal, whispering something into his ear, and he nodded with the slow dread of a man being walked to the gallows. And of course, Elias continued, ling up a garish slide that read Omnicorp Integration Strategy. "The 90-day plan. We want to ensure alignment across all verticals. This includes evaluating our talent deployment to eliminate duplication and boost efficiency." There it was. The death nail dressed up like a motivational quote. Translation: "We're firing people. We just haven't picked your name yet." The younger execs smiled like wolves. Richard could see it now, the game plan. First, charm them, gut them, and when the old-timers boil and say, "We value your legacy, but we're building the future." When Elias finally stepped down after a painfully awkward icebreaker where he asked everyone to name one thing they love about change, the crowd dispersed in silence. A few Apex Global employees clapped. Nobody else did. No one dared speak the first word afterward, like breaking the quiet would invite the axe. Back at his desk, Richard found a new email in his inbox. Subject: Policy Update Apex Global Employment Handbook, V7.1 Attachment. Onboarding HR Apex Global PDF. He opened it half expecting to see his termination date already filled in. The document was thick with corporate nonsense, but one line stood out like a knife in the ribs. All previous employment agreements, contracts, and incentive plans shall be deemed void as of acquisition close date. Employment is now governed under the at-will policies outlined herein. He read it again and again. His hands didn't shake yet, but his jaw did clench hard enough that his MERS groaned. They thought they'd covered everything, wiped the slate clean, erased his contract with one generic clause written by some overpaid drone who'd never set foot in this building. Except they hadn't, not completely. Because Richard's original contract wasn't just a PDF signed in DocuSign and forgotten. It wasn't digital, it wasn't standard, it was leather-bound. It was weird and it was real. He stood up slowly, ignoring the chime of another incoming email, some morale-boosting invite to Apex Global Spirit Week. Wear green on Thursday, because nothing says we value your humanity like color-coded uniforms. He walked past the break room where a new touchscreen coffee machine had replaced his trusty bun brewer. Past the IT desk where Simon, the one engineer still hanging on by a thread, was quietly uninstalling root access from his own machine. Past the poster that now covered the hallway wall. One Omni, one goal, one future. A future that didn't seem to have room for his yet. But Richard was starting to remember things, and they were about to remember him. Started with a calendar ping. Just a little ding, an invite with no subject line, no agenda, no context, just a room number. 3C East. Richard had never been in 3C East. In fact, he wasn't entirely sure it had existed before Apex Global arrival. It wasn't on the old floor plan. Probably some broom closet that converted into a private consultation space during the cultural gutting. His mouse hovered over the decline button for half a second. Instinct told this wasn't optional. When he arrived, the room was already occupied. 2 chairs on one side of the table, one on the other. It was cold. Too cold, not metaphorically, literally. The AC was blasting like the room was hiding spoiled meat. The man sitting across from the solo chair wore a gray suit and an even grayer expression. He didn't rise to greet him. His hands were folded neatly over a manila folder. He looked at his like he was a customer returning expired produce without a receipt. Next to him sat a man from HR, Apex Global HR, not Innovate HR. Richard had never seen his before. But he wore the practiced tight smile of someone trained to look sympathetic while pulling the trigger. "Richard Monroe?" the man asked, though he clearly already knew. He nodded, sitting down without being asked. "I'm Gideon Pierce, Vice President of Operational Realignment. That wasn't a job, that was a threat." Wearing a tie. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the folder like it might leap up and explain itself. "We've been conducting a role evaluation across both legacy teams and have identified certain redundancies." Richard didn't blink. He didn't move. The silence dared him to be specific. Gideon shifted in his seat. "Your position has been deemed an unfortunate overlap." There it was. The axe, dull and indifferent, slid the folder across the table like it was a napkin. "In accordance with Apex Global severance guidelines, you'll receive 2 weeks base pay, prorated vacation, and COBRA continuation options. The package also includes a standard non-disparagement clause which will need signed within 5 business days." The HR man chimed in. "We understand this may come as a surprise, and we truly value your contributions to the Innovate legacy." Legacy word hit like spit on a grave. Richard stared at the folder without touching it. "Just to clarify," he said, his voice perfectly even, "no one from my actual department was consulted about this." Gideon's jaw tensed. "The decision was made holistically in collaboration with our workforce optimization team." And no warning, he glanced at the HR man, clearly out of his depth. He jumped in with a pre-cooked line. Him to treat all team transitions with dignity and respect. "Please know this decision isn't personal." Richard smiled, but not kindly. "Then why does it feel like euthanasia?" Neither answered. He stood. They both visibly relaxed, probably thinking he was going to leave quietly. But instead, he leaned forward and placed both palms on the table right over the folder. "I built the infrastructure you just migrated. I onboarded your clients, designed the automation you're now calling efficiencies, and not a single one of you thought to learn my name before firing me." Gideon cleared his throat again. "Richard, I know this is difficult." "No, you don't. You've never done a difficult thing in your life. You do sanitary things, paper things, spreadsheet things. You kill without looking." The HR rep opened his mouth, but Richard was already walking out the door. He returned to his desk like a ghost, retracing its last moments. Co-workers, once friends, now cowards, peeked over monitors but said nothing. Even Simon, the one guy he thought might give as a nod, kept his eyes glued to his screen like it held the secrets of the universe. He opened his bottom drawer, pulled out the small cardboard box he'd once used to carry his lunch in during crunch weeks. It still smelled faintly of Thai basil and hope. He packed slowly, methodically not to drag it out, because he refused to rush for them. Mouse, mug, photos, the leather folio went on top. He walked the length of the office, box in hand, each step a reminder of what they had erased in a 10-minute meeting. No one stopped him. No one said goodbye except one, Toby. He popped out of the break room with a protein bar in hand, looked at the box, and tilted his head. "Oh, are you transferring to a new team?" He walked right past him. Didn't say a word. Need something? He was already sharpening the knife. Richard sat at the kitchen table in his bathrobe at 2:07 in the afternoon, blinking at the glow of his laptop, like it might spontaneously generate purpose. His hair was in the same loose bun he tied it into the night before, now lopsided and aching. The coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, untouched. The tab open on his screen read, Top 10 Resume Tips for 40-plus Professionals Re-Entering the Workforce. Wanted to throw the laptop through the window. The job boards were a graveyard. Each listing screamed the same quiet insult, looking for a hungry, fast-moving self-starter who thrives in chaos and wears multiple hats. He had worn all the hats backwards, sideways, upside down while juggling flaming swords. He had bled for hats, but now they wanted hats on kids who knew how to design a pitch deck in Canva and thought Slack emojis were a management strategy. Clicked through page after page like he was scrolling his own obituary. At some point, the day outside shifted from gray to storm dark. Thunder rolled distantly. The soft ticking of the kitchen clock was the only sign that time still moved. He sighed and stood, heading for the cabinet where he kept the important adult paperwork, bills, health insurance, the occasional birthday card from his mom that still had glitter on it. He needed his 40 Million K login info. Thing about updating his rollover information. Something about pretending his life was still progressing in a straight line. He dug through envelopes and folders, pulling out a few printouts of long-forgotten passwords, some tax returns, an old electric bill from 2011 that had no business still existing, and then he saw it. The leather, a rich ox blood red dulled from time but unmistakably out of place among the drab paper world. His fingers brushed it. He paused. The Horizon Dynamics contract. He had forgotten it existed in physical form. It was heavier than he remembered, thicker, too. Gold lettering still faintly etched on the cover. David had handed it to his in-person back when they were still operating out of a shared space above a failing yoga studio. He had insisted, "We don't do boilerplate here. I wanted something tactile, something real." Back then, he'd humored him. Now he held it like a time capsule, sat back down, opened the folio, and began to flip through the pages. It was all there, his job title, compensation package, early-stage equity options, long since converted to real shares. The original IP clause he'd once argued about with legal scribbled notes in Walter's handwriting in the margins. Fix this wording here. Add 10% more vesting there. Then he saw it. Section 9. Change of control provision. His eyes stopped, froze, read. In the event that Horizon Dynamics, Inc. is acquired, merged, or otherwise absorbed by another entity, the employee shall be entitled to accelerated vesting of all outstanding equity, including unexercised shares and a performance-equivalent bonus in stock if termination without cause occurs within a net 2 months of said change of control. This provision shall survive acquisition and supersede future at-will revisions unless individually waived in writing by the employee. Richard's mouth went dry. He kept reading faster now. Termination without cause, change of control, supersede future revisions. His heart thudded once hard like a kick in the chest. He had never waived it. No one had ever asked his to, because no one had bothered to read it. "Hey, Richard, this is Gideon Pierce. I wanted to personally, apologize if our previous meeting came across as, impersonal. I think there may have been some misalignment internally. Please give me a call back at your convenience." Richard nearly dropped his coffee from laughing so hard. It was delicious. There it was. The sound of ego melting, panic tucked between syllables, the kind of corporate fear that smells like stale conference rooms and ruined bonuses. He could picture it all clearly. The emergency meetings, the red-faced execs, The PowerPoint decks, with his name on the first slide and phrases like urgent liability exposure and unmitigated risk due to legacy agreements. Gideon had become the sacrificial offering. The idiot who swung the axe and didn't notice the tripwire. Word was probably spreading fast. Some dusty old Innovate contract had detonated on impact and no one had seen it coming. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Julian called again. This time, Richard answered. He sat on the couch, calm, cross-legged, a bowl of microwaved popcorn in his lap, like he was watching a Netflix docuseries called Corporate Implosion. The slow death of smug bastards, Richard, Julian said, the forced brightness of a man trying to disguise fire behind his eyes. So glad we could finally connect. He didn't return the pleasantry. I wanted to speak personto person before things got too formal. We absolutely respect the documentation you've provided, and we're committed to finding a resolution that feels fair for everyone involved. He didn't say anything. Let him dangle. We've spoken with our team, and based on the information we have, be prepared to offer a severance enhancement of, let me confirm, yes dollars. 15 many as a good faith gesture, assuming you'd be willing to sign a full release. Richard chewed his popcorn, slowly swallowed. That's cute. Sorry, Julian asked, caught off guard. Your good faith gesture is about 1.many% of what you legally owe me. He said deadpan. So no, Julian, you don't get to call that an offer. To call that an insult with a comma in it. Richard, he said, the tone tightening. I understand you may be upset. Oh, I'm not upset, he interrupted. I'm amused. You people didn't even read the fine print before cutting me loose. And now you're throwing monopoly money at the problem like I'm too dumb to notice. Julian exhaled, trying to regroup. Look, we'd really prefer not to involve litigation. It's expensive. It's public. No one wins in that scenario. Richard smiled. Tell that to your board. My lawyer's name is Feast Greer. You should already have his contact information. I suggest you use it. And with that, he hung up. No fanfare, no mic drop, just power, quiet, cold, and absolute. The next day, he got another voicemail. Same voice, same scramble. Only this time, Julian didn't offer money. He asked for time. Too late. He forwarded the voicemail to Helen with a simple subject line. Let the games begin. Started with a manila envelope shoved through the mail slot like a ransom note. No postage, no courier, just hand-delivered hostility. Richard opened it on the kitchen counter, slicing the seal with the edge of a butter knife that suddenly felt far too small for the war he was in. The letter inside was 9 pages of weaponized legally, from Apex Global top-shelf law firm, a place with a name that sounded like a pharmaceutical for erectile dysfunction. Dresden, Halberstam, and Leal LLP. The tone wasn't friendly, it wasn't neutral, it was full-on scorched earth. They accused his of violating confidentiality. They implied he had mishandled proprietary data. They stated in bold font and full caps that his termination may be reclassified as for cause pending internal review, which would nullify any rights to compensation under his prior employment contract. Final paragraph read like a hiss. If you or your counsel proceed with legal action, Apex Global reserves the right to pursue counterclaims for breach of fiduciary duty, reputational harm, and willful misconduct. Richard's breath caught. For a brief second, the paranoia crept in. Was this it? Was this where they turned it all to ash? He stood there in the kitchen, staring at the letter while the dishwasher hummed behind his like it didn't know the air had just changed. His phone buzzed from Helen. They blinked. You're winning. Richard called immediately. Helen answered mid-chew. They're bluffing, he said, through what sounded like a protein bar. Classic corporate saber-rattling. They've got nothing and they know it. Richard walked to the living room, the letter still in hand. They're claiming I violated confidentiality. They always do. It's boilerplate scare tactics. If they had something, they'd lead with it and skip the drama. But willful misconduct, Helen scoffed. Please. If using your legally binding contract counts as misconduct, we're all going to jail for remembering things. They're just pissed they missed the clause, and now they're flailing. Richard sat on the couch, the edge of the letter crumpling under his grip. Helen's voice softened. They're trying to shake you, Richard. That's all. You're making them bleed money and look incompetent. They need you scared so they can reset the table. Don't let them. Richard nodded more to herself than the phone. Going to keep coming, aren't they? Like rats in suits, Helen said. But they don't know you've already built the flood. The next day the email started. Old co-workers. People he hadn't heard from in months, reached out with suddenly cautious tones. "Hey, just heard some stuff floating around. Are you okay?" Apex Global legal team asked me if you'd ever been erratic. I told them no, obviously, but heads up. Someone from risk management called me, asked if you ever took client files home. They were digging desperately, pathetically, trying to retrofit a reason to claim he'd always been a problem, painting his as unstable, unethical, disposable. The same man who used to run sprint planning and client handoffs with a folder under one arm and a Red Bull in the other, now reimagined as a security risk with a grudge. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so exhausting. At night, he couldn't sleep. Heart drummed in his chest like it was trying to claw its way out. He kept seeing that phrase in the letter for cause, like a death sentence circling the drain. He drank more than he should, ate less than he wanted. But still, every morning he woke up and read Section 9 again like scripture. 2 days later, Helen called almost giddy. "Guess who just got suspended?" Richard blinked. "Who was it?" "Your boy Gideon. The guy who terminated you pulled off active duties, pending internal investigation, which means they're prepping to feed him to the wolves." Richard sat back in his chair, stunned already. "Oh yeah, my bet." He didn't even know about the contract, which means now they're asking him, "Why didn't you do your job? Why didn't you flag the clause?" Someone's scar take the fall and his neck's already in the noose. For the first time in days, Richard smiled again. Not a smirk, not a performance. A real one. He was rattled. Yes, tired. Absolutely. But the ground was shifting and he could feel it. They had tried the charm, it failed. Tried the money, it flopped. Now they tried fear, and he was still standing. A little bruised maybe, but standing, and behind his, growing louder by the day, was the thunder of something big coming down. The call came at 8:03 in the morning on a Tuesday, just as Richard was spooning instant coffee into a chipped mug that read "One Project Witch, gag gift from his team," back when they still had inside jokes and reasons to smile. His phone lit up with Helen Greer. No text, no warning, just the call. Richard stared at it for a second, then answered. Helen didn't waste time. "It's done." The words landed like a slow building echo. Richard didn't move. "They've agreed to the full payout," Helen continued. "Every dollar, no settlement, no clause tweaking, no delay. Clean wire transfer scheduled for today." They folded all the way down. Richard leaned on the counter, the weight of it hitting his like a gentle wrecking ball. "What changed?" "Board meeting last night," Helen said. "Legal laid out the math. You had them boxed in, contract airtight, paper trail clear, termination within the trigger window." Then someone finally asked the magic question. "What happens if this gets out?" Richard could hear the smirk in Helen's voice now. "A shareholder lawsuit over gross negligence during a 9-figure acquisition. Whistleblower story that frames Apex Global as a Goliath squashing one of its own. No PR strategy in the world saves them from that." "You weren't a threat to their money, Richard. You were a threat to their reputation. That's what finally did it." Richard blinked, his vision blurred. Not with tears, just static. The kind that comes after days of pressure, finally lift and your body forgets how to carry itself without armor. "And Gideon," he asked, a short, satisfied pause. "Terminated effective immediately. Official reason? Failure to exercise due diligence in a high-liability personnel matter. Translation, he's the sacrificial lamb." And they tossed him without a second thought. Richard sat down at the kitchen table, his knees suddenly remembering they were human. The sunlight broke through the slats of the blinds, cutting soft lines across his old laminate surface. His laptop was already open, reflex. He clicked into his bank portal. Waited. There it was. The number didn't look real. Not at first. Just digits and decimals on a pale blue background. But then he saw the wire memo. Omnip transfer legal comp settlement. Innovate equity vesting 11/7 Menion many Wadu and 40 no confetti. No trumpet sound. Just a blinking cursor waiting for the next transaction. Richard stared at it for minutes, for lifetimes. He didn't feel elated or greedy, or even victorious in the chest, thumping way movies try to sell you. He felt still like the world had finally quit spinning just long enough for his to get his balance back. His email chimed, "Subject, you win." It was from Simon, the one guy who couldn't look his in the eye when he packed up his desk. "Just wanted you to know Gideon got canned today. Everyone's talking about it. HR won't confirm. Rumor is the board found out he fired you without reviewing your file. That clause legend status. Drinks on me if you ever want to gloat. Hope you're okay. He closed the tab, took a long sip from the coffee in his cracked mug. It tasted awful, burnt, instant, exactly the same as it always had, and still it was the best coffee he'd had in years. No speeches, no revenge speech into a mirror, no plan for what came next. Just his kitchen, $11 million, and a silence he had finally earned. He hadn't just burned the bridge. He'd paved the river underneath with gold. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.